Hey guys, tonight we drift into a Cairo you've never quite imagined. A city of swirling smoke, crooked lanterns, and a hum of life that never really settles. Picture this. The year is somewhere in the middle of the 19th century. The air heavy, with desert dust, donkey carts rattling across uneven cobblestones, and the Nile glinting faintly under the moon. You walk through a city where the call to prayer has just died down, replaced by murmurs, bargaining, and laughter slipping out from behind latticed windows. This is not the Cairo of postcard pyramids. It's the Cairo of hidden smoke, of narrow doors leading you toward indulgences that the official world pretends not to notice. And yes, if you stumbled here in real life, you probably wouldn't survive the combination of dodgy street food, suspiciously murky water, and your complete inability to negotiate a fair price for literally anything. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is right now. I love seeing how far this sleepy little caravan travels across the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge into Cairo at twilight, brushing past merchants who are hastily pulling down awnings. The day's heat lingers, clinging to your skin like syrup. A few stubborn fruit sellers are still, hawking their figs and pomegranates, calling out half-hearted prices, while across the way a man in a flowing robe balances an impossible tray of bread on his head. The city, alive all day, does not sleep at night. It just shifts moods. By the glow of oil lamps, you notice how the streets narrow, winding like a puzzle. The main thoroughfares are loud, full of coffee houses where arguments about poetry, politics, and football that doesn't yet exist spill into the air. But just beyond, past the lantern-lit stalls, lie the less obvious doorways, those that open only for the ones who know the knock. It's here that whispers begin to drift around you, whispers about rooms perfumed with something sweeter than tobacco. Cairo's hidden hashish dens breathe under the surface like quiet embers, offering a kind of solace, a kind of rebellion, or maybe just an excuse to pass time until dawn. You notice how locals pretend not to notice. They glance away as men slip into unmarked courtyards. This is the hush-hush economy, woven into the fabric of the city so tightly it feels like part of the street itself. Historians still argue whether Cairo at this time was genuinely tolerant of such indulgence or if it merely looked the other way out of exhaustion. The reality probably lies in between. Officials could raid one den at breakfast and accept a pouch of resin from another by dinner. Like many empires before it, the Ottoman administrators in Egypt preferred contradictions. It let them keep everyone, just slightly nervous. The streets tonight are dense with smells. Grilled lamb, incense, the faint metallic tang of donkey sweat, and yes, the sharp, earthy trace of hashish drifting from somewhere unseen. You imagine following it, like a cartoon, character floating toward the scent of pie. But instead, you pause at a tea stand where a boy pours steaming black liquid from a dented kettle, stretching it theatrically from arm's length to glass. You sip. It's bitter, strong enough to wake the dead pharaohs. A local joke floats. If you drink enough tea, you won't need hashish, just permanent insomnia. You laugh, even if you suspect the joke has been recycled for centuries. As twilight deepens, the lanterns hanging from wooden beams sputter to life, glowing orange against the shadows. You pass a group of storytellers, their audience sprawled, on rugs, heads tilted like sunflowers. The tale is long, winding, something about a fisherman who found a talking jar. The smoke rising from a nearby brazier makes the story seem twice as surreal. Cairo thrives on this mix, myth and market, joke and sermon, tea and hashish. You're not invited inside yet, not directly. Outsiders usually aren't, but you've caught a glimpse of the rhythm, the shifting of bodies towards side alleys, the small conspiratorial nods, the way men's eyes flick toward the same shadowy courtyard. That's where the hidden havens wait. Tonight, you'll linger just long enough at the edge to sense them, to hear the muffled laughter, to smell the haze. Curling beneath the shutters, a donkey brays obnoxiously, snapping you back. Somewhere a lute twangs and immediately breaks a string, sending up a round of chuckles. The city doesn't mind your wandering, it swallows you whole, and while the pyramids may impress tourists, it's this twilight hush, the quiet slipping, of people into smoke-filled sanctuaries that carries the real story. You keep walking. The cobblestones are uneven, forcing you to shuffle like an amateur tightrope walker. And in that shuffle, you realize the city itself is like the dens you've been hearing about, layered, hidden, requiring a practiced eye. Cairo does not reveal everything at once. Instead, it invites you deeper, lantern by lantern, whisper by whisper. You keep drifting deeper into the labyrinth until the main boulevards dissolve into crooked little lanes where the stones are uneven, and the walls lean as if conspiring above your head. Here, lanterns are fewer, and the glow they cast is soft, wavering, enough to turn shadows into playful ghosts. These are the streets that locals sometimes call the lantern veins, narrow capillaries carrying men toward their nightly indulgences. A cat darts across your path, its eyes catching the lamplight like twin coins. Somewhere behind you, Dr. slams, followed by the muffled laughter of young men pretending they weren't just caught sneaking off. The air is thicker here. Spice merchants have shuttered their stalls, but the smell of cumin and coriander clings to the cracks, and drifting through it, subtle but unmistakable, is a sweetness that is not sugar. You catch a glimpse of two men pausing by an unmarked wooden door. One leans forward, gives what looks like an absent-minded knock, and just like that, the door creaks open, letting a ribbon of smoke slither out before swallowing them. The entrance closes again, leaving the alley looking like nothing at all. Historians still argue whether these unmarked doors were common knowledge or tightly guarded secrets. Some accounts insist that anyone who knew how to buy bread could also find a den. Others describe elaborate codes and layers of trust before you'd ever be let inside. The truth probably depends on where you stood in Cairo's hierarchy, whether you were a dock worker with the right cousin or a foreigner fumbling with a phrase book. You linger under a flickering lantern, and for a moment you catch yourself in the reflection of a brass water jug left outside a doorway. Your face looks distorted, elongated, like a funhouse mirror. You joke to yourself that this is the pre-hashish hallucination package. Cairo doesn't even wait until you step inside to warp your perception. As you turn another corner, the streets get quieter. A boy carrying a tray of tea passes by, the glasses rattling like wind chimes, the liquid glowing amber in the dim light. He ducks into a doorway, and for a second you glimpse the inside. Low cushions, men leaning close, smoke curling upward in lazy spirals. Then the door shuts, and you're left in the dark again. A donkey cart rattles past, the driver half asleep, his whip dangling uselessly. He's humming a tune that sounds suspiciously like it's missing half its notes, but maybe that's the point. Music here feels like it doesn't need to be whole to be true. The quirky thing is, while Cairo at night could feel illicit, it wasn't entirely hidden. Some neighborhoods almost treated the dens as extensions of the street. Kids would run errands, for men inside, delivering tea or bread, while wives sent messages asking their husbands if they planned to come home before dawn, or at all. One European traveler even claimed he saw a police officer step out of a den, adjust his uniform, and immediately scold another man for going in. Hypocrisy was basically part of the wallpaper, but not everyone approved. Reformist voices. Both local scholars and Ottoman administrators warned that these lantern-lit alleys were leading Cairo's soul into decadence. Pamphlets circulated, painting images of young men wasting their futures in smoke. Of course, the irony was that the AOE, very same pamphlets were sometimes sold right outside the dens, ensuring both profit and publicity. Imagine modern advertising, except your anti-hashish message doubles as free marketing for the nearest lounge. You keep walking, noting how each doorway looks almost identical, plain, wooden, easy to miss. Yet you start recognizing patterns. A extra lantern hung outside, a faint line of sandals left near the threshold, the telltale hush that seems too intentional. It's almost like a game of Spot the Portal. You think of video games with secret doors hidden behind suspiciously different bricks, and you realize Cairo perfected that centuries earlier. Then, as the alley bends once more, you hear laughter, spill out, a deep, unguarded laughter, the kind that carries no fear. Someone inside is telling a story, and the punchline is apparently devastatingly good. You can't help but smile. The street itself, dim and crooked, seems to lean closer, as if eager to catch the joke. By now the moon has climbed higher, silvering the rooftops, while lanterns below glow like earthbound stars. Cairo's alleys feel alive, not dangerous exactly, but definitely watchful. Every sound matters, every flicker of light tells you where the pulse of the city truly is, not in the broad avenues, but in these little arteries feeding hidden hearts of smoke. And with each turn, you sense it more strongly. You're being invited, slowly, not with words, but with the rhythm of footsteps and lanterns. The city doesn't rush you. It knows you'll eventually knock on one of those doors. The door doesn't look like much, just plain cedar, worn smooth by years of hands pressing against it. No sign, no painted symbol, nothing to say what lies behind. Yet when you finally gather the courage to slip inside, the entire world tilts. The noise of the alley dulls instantly, swallowed by heavy curtains, and in its place comes a muted hum, the sort of hush that people create when they are deliberately choosing to be outside the usual order of things. Your eyes adjust slowly. The first thing you see are cushions, low, sprawling, draped in fabrics that have seen better days, yet still manage to look inviting. Reds deep as pomegranate seeds, gold thread worn to dull bronze. Men recline half on their sides, their sandals, left in a messy heap by the door. Brass trays glimmer faintly in the lamplight, holding cups of sweet tea and, more importantly, the tools of the night. Pipes, coals, and small lumps of resin. The air is thick, not stifling exactly, but heavy, layered with the sweet, earthy scent of burning hashish. You breathe in carefully, and already your head feels softer, as though your thoughts are being padded. A man across the room chuckles for no clear reason, his laughter dissolving into a cough, then back into another chuckle. Nobody minds. Here, laughter and coughing live as neighbors. One host, his robe a little cleaner than the rest, tends to. A glowing brazier in the corner. He uses long iron tongs to balance a coal before lowering it onto the bowl of a waiting pipe. The resin bubbles, releasing a cloud that curls upward like a ribbon of silk. He hands the pipe to a man who accepts. It's as if he's just been offered the keys to paradise. You watch as he inhales deeply, holds it, then lets it drift from his lips like incense from a temple. Historians still argue whether these dens were primarily about relaxation, mysticism, or simple escapism. Some accounts describe them as poor, men's retreats from unbearable daily labor. Others paint them as intellectual salons where poets and philosophers dabbled in altered states. Likely, as you can see now, they were both. Dockworkers and scribes lounging side by side, equalized by smoke and cushions. The quirky detail you notice is the way everyone seems to share everything. Pipes, tea, even the stories. A man you've never seen before leans in and offers you a date from his plate, sticky with syrup. You decline politely, mostly because you're still haunted by the advice that eating random street food here might be a one-way ticket to lifelong regret. He shrugs, pops it into his mouth, and grins as though the universe has just whispered a secret directly to him. In the corner, a group debates something fiercely. You catch words, dreams, visions, prophets, mixed with bursts of laughter. It's not entirely serious, not entirely frivolous. They're weaving philosophy with jokes, a pastime Cairo seems to excel at. One man insists that hashish opens the doors of perception. Another claims it simply makes you forget how to tie your sandals. Both sound equally convincing under the smoky haze. You stretch out on a cushion, feeling the fabric scratch against your arm. The lamp overhead sputters, its flame dancing every time the door opens and someone new shuffles in. With each arrival comes another ripple of scent, another wave of low laughter, another shift in the shared rhythm. The den isn't chaotic, it's a tide pool with currents of sound and smoke swirling gently around. It strikes you how little sense of time exists here. Outside, Cairo runs on market hours, prayers, the endless errands of survival. Inside, you could be anywhere in the night. A man leans back so far he looks like he might dissolve into his cushion. Another is already snoring softly, undisturbed by the murmurs around him. If there's a clock, no one cares to check it. Someone plucks at a lute. Just a few notes, no full song, as if testing whether sound itself feels different in this haze. The notes hang in the air longer than they should, or maybe it's just your mind stretching them. Either way, everyone seems to agree the moment is good enough because they all nod along, eyes half closed. One European traveler once described these dens as caverns of dreamers, his tone somewhere between scandalized and jealous. He claimed the smoke made the walls themselves bend, like the room was breathing with its patrons. Sitting here now, you understand why he might have said that. The lamp smoke and hashish clouds do give the illusion of shifting, as though the plaster itself is exhaling. The host returns, refilling trays, stirring coals, and occasionally cracking a joke that makes half the room snort into their tea. He is both caretaker and ringleader, keeping the fragile ecosystem intact. Without him, the den might collapse into silence or chaos. With him, it hums like a tuned instrument. And there you are, in the middle of it, realizing this is less about intoxication and more about atmosphere. The cushions, the brass, the low hum of voices, the curling smoke, they weave together into a cocoon. Outside, Cairo clatters with markets and patrols. Inside, you're in a pocket of suspension, a room where time hesitates, laughter lingers, and reality feels just slightly negotiable. The host sets down a small brass tray in front of you, the surface already sticky with spilled syrup and ash from earlier rounds. On it sits the evening's centerpiece, a clay pipe, its bowl darkened from years of use, and a lump of resinous hashish, the color of wet earth with a glimmering sheen when caught in the lamplight. Next to it, like supporting cast, lie tiny cakes of something greenish, pressed into little discs that look almost like sweets you'd find in a pastry shop. Except these would send you somewhere other than your grandmother's kitchen. You watch as the resin is carefully kneaded between, fingers still dusted with flour from some earlier task. The substance is warm, pliant, and surprisingly aromatic, with a scent that is both earthy and faintly sweet, almost like dried figs rolled in smoke. The host hums as he works, pressing it into the shallow bowl of the pipe before covering it with a glowing coal. Immediately, a fragrant curl rises, smooth and heady, filling the air with what feels like centuries of ritual. The man beside you explains, between slow puffs, that some prefer the paste form, kneaded with honey or butter until it becomes a sticky brown ball. This can be eaten in small amounts, though small is rarely as small as recommended. Others crumble it into peppered confections, strange sweets that make you feel light, as if your bones are filled with feathers. You nod along, though you silently file away the mental note that Victorian stomach medicine was probably not prepared to handle resin-laced honey balls. Historians still argue whether these preparations were carried out for flavor, for potency, or for sheer convenience. Was it easier to disguise hashish in candy for casual consumption, or was it simply another excuse for the city's famous sweet tooth? Cairo has never been shy about sugar, and adding hashish into the mix may have been just another extension of culinary indulgence. The quirky fact you learned tonight is that some recipes actually recommended adding pepper or cloves, not for taste, but supposedly to keep the body awake while the mind wanders. In other words, ancient energy drinks disguised as dessert. Imagine explaining that to a modern cafe barista. Yes, I'll have a double espresso, 3 pumps of vanilla, and oh, could you add a pinch of resin so my spirit can stroll through paradise while my body still pays rent? The den grows quieter as more smoke rises. Conversations dissolve into murmurs, half-formed thoughts left floating in the air. A man begins a story about a merchant who tricked a sultan, but halfway through he forgets the plot and simply laughs, shaking his head as though that in itself were the moral. Nobody minds. In this haze, beginnings and endings don't matter. What matters is the lingering pause in between. The sensory detail is overwhelming. The cushions beneath you have absorbed centuries of smoke, smelling like 1,000 past evenings stacked together. The pipe's mouthpiece tastes faintly metallic, and the smoke itself has a surprising texture. Velvety, not harsh, settling into your chest like a heavy but friendly guest. You feel the subtle weight of it tugging at your eyelids, blurring the sharp edges of the room. One man across the way demonstrates the paste version, pressing a sticky ball onto a glowing coal and inhaling the curling smoke through a small reed. He gestures for you to watch the way the resin bubbles, popping gently like sugar on a pan. This, he declares, is the taste of eternity. His audience bursts out laughing at the grandiosity of it, but you can tell that beneath the joke, there's a sincerity. He means it. In a corner, someone munches on a resin-laced sweet. He chews slowly, as though it takes an eternity just to decide how his jaw should move. The host teases him. Careful, or you'll still be chewing when dawn comes. The room chuckles again, the kind of laughter that rolls and stretches, soft and warm, filling every corner. It occurs to you that this ritual of pipes and pastes isn't just about the effects. It's about the process, the deliberate pressing of resin, the careful balancing of coals, the quiet waiting for smoke to rise. The preparation itself is a performance, drawing the group into a shared rhythm. Nobody rushes. Nobody needs to. Cairo outside may move in frantic bursts, bargains shouted, carts pushed, prayers timed to the minute. But here, in this hidden haven, time burns as slowly as the resin. As the night deepens, the coals glow brighter against the dim lamps. You find yourself mesmerized by their quiet crackle, each pop sounding like a tiny agreement between fire and earth. The smell grows sweeter, heavier, almost like molasses thickening, in the air. You shift on your cushion, realizing that even without indulging directly, the haze has wrapped you into its slow embrace. And as you look around, you notice the same expression repeated on every face. Half smile, half dream. A softness that belongs to no specific person but to the room itself. Pipes and pastes are just the tools. The real indulgence is this shared suspension, this drifting away from Cairo's noise into a place where nothing needs finishing, and nothing really needs beginning either. The smoke still clings to your hair. As you step out again, though the street air feels sharper now, cutting through the haze with a breeze that smells of dust and spices. Cairo never stops buzzing. Even at this late hour, you hear the call of water sellers clanging their brass cups together, donkey carts creaking as if their wheels are sighing, and laughter spilling from coffee houses. The two worlds, tea and tobacco on one side, hashish, and cushions on the other, overlap more than you might expect. Coffee houses here are more than caffeine dispensers. They're the social backbone of the city. Men crowd around backgammon boards, dice clattering like pebbles in a jar. Others lean close, voices rising in argument over the latest political rumor from Istanbul, or the cost of grain, or whether a poet in Alexandria actually stole his best line. You slide into one of these open cafes, partly to rest your feet, and partly to notice how easily their rhythms bleed into the world of smoke you just left. The quirk is this. Many of the dens share walls, or sometimes even hidden doorways, with coffee houses. A man might order a bitter black brew in one room, then slip through a curtain into another where cushions and smoke wait. In some places, the coffee house itself doubles as the den, the difference only being whether the back brazier burns tobacco or resin. It's a kind of architectural multitasking, like the 19th century version of a bookstore that also sells oat milk lattes and scented candles. Historians still argue whether these overlapping spaces were tolerated because they encouraged debate and storytelling, or whether authorities simply couldn't tell where the coffee house ended and the hashish den began. Perhaps the line was always blurry on purpose. In Cairo, ambiguity has often been a form of survival. You sit at a table where the wood is so worn it looks polished. The waiter arrives with a tiny glass of coffee, thick as tar, sweetened with more sugar than seems advisable. You take a sip, and immediately wonder if your teeth might dissolve on the spot. Around you, men puff on shishas, the bubbling water jars making a sound like frogs croaking. The tobacco smells of apple, rose, and mint. But every so often, you catch that sharper, sweeter note of hashish, drifting in from somewhere unseen, weaving itself into the bouquet. One man at the next table begins quoting lines from a poet, his voice lilting and theatrical. Another interrupts, accusing him of misremembering the verse, and the two launch into a spirited debate that draws a small crowd. You smile, half the city seems to run on arguments performed as public theatre. The soundscape is as layered as the smells, bubbling shishas, clinking cups, the rasp of a storyteller clearing his throat, the thump of a hand striking a backgammon, bored in triumph. Cairo doesn't so much quiet down at night as it shifts gears, trading the hammering of metalworkers for the chatter of sleepless thinkers. From your seat, you notice a man slip behind a curtain in the far corner. He re-emerges. 10 minutes later, his eyes heavy-lidded, his smile relaxed, like someone who just remembered a very funny dream. Nobody comments. Everyone understands. The city has always allowed space for both, buzzing argument and smoky silence, to exist in the same breath. The quirky traveler's tale, you recall, is of a Frenchman in the 1840s who complained that Cairo's coffeehouses smelled of both paradise and purgatory. He couldn't decide whether to be scandalized or delighted, so he wrote both at once, neatly capturing the city's contradiction. Reading it later, you can't help but laugh, because if you've sat in one tonight, you'd probably write the same. And here's the thing. The overlap wasn't accidental. Coffeehouses gave hashish dens cover. An officer passing by might shrug off the smell, assuming it was just another mix of tobacco and kitchen smoke. The dens depended on this proximity, thriving in the camouflage of social normalcy. One sip of coffee, one puff of shisha, one shuffle behind a curtain, and you were in another world entirely. You tap your finger against the table, feeling the rhythm of dice and arguments all around. The place is alive but somehow calming, like white noise in human form. You can't help but think, Cairo had already invented the concept of the multifunctional hangout spot. Starbucks could only dream of such efficiency. You step back into the night air, your ears still ringing faintly from the clatter of dice and coffeehouse arguments. The street feels a little emptier now, though not silent. Cairo never truly sleeps. As you drift toward another crooked lane, you notice two figures in uniform lingering near a doorway. Ottoman officers, their red fezzes tilted just so, swords, hanging at their sides, pretending to be on duty. But their eyes betray them, glancing toward the very same unmarked doors you've been watching. One mutters something to the other, a joke perhaps, and both chuckle before disappearing behind the doorframe. It's almost comical, the supposed guardians of morality sneaking in with the rest. Colonial and imperial eyes, whether Ottoman, French, or later British, often condemned these dens as dens of idleness and sin. They wrote reports about the dangers of Oriental excess, lecturing about laziness and corruption. Yet behind the scenes, those same officers often slipped inside to enjoy what they scolded others for. The hypocrisy, you realize, was less a secret than a kind of unspoken performance, public sternness, private indulgence. Historians still argue whether these crackdowns were genuine moral campaigns or simply exercises in political control. Was hashish really considered such a threat, or was it just an easy target for demonstrating authority? Some scholars suggest that when rulers wanted to flex their power, they raided dens. When they wanted bribes or favors, they looked the other way. Cairo's streets knew how to read the difference, the quirky detail you overhear from a local storyteller. There's a saying that a policeman can smell hashish only when he isn't smoking it himself. The crowd listening bursts out laughing, nodding knowingly. Jokes like this were survival tactics, ways of poking fun at authority without directly confronting it. Cairo's humor has always been sharper than its swords. You walk a little further, and the signs of official presence grow more subtle. A horse tied near a lamppost, reins loose, its rider conveniently absent. A uniform jacket folded over a chair in a coffeehouse, its owner mysteriously missing. Even the authorities, it seems, needed a break from being authorities. The irony deepens. When you recall the European travelers' diaries, full of moral outrage about the degeneracy of these smoky havens, they painted Cairo as a city on the brink of collapse, weakened by indulgence. Yet, tucked between the lines, many admitted they had peaked inside themselves. A few even described the experience in detail, betraying how fascinated they really were. One Englishman described a den as a place both repulsive and magnetic, from which one departs reluctantly. You can almost see him, pencil in hand, furiously scribbling his condemnation while secretly planning his next visit. The lamps along the street flicker as the oil burns low. You notice how the glow plays tricks on the walls, making them look as though they're shifting, Perhaps that's why colonial officers described Cairo as slippery, hard to pin down. The city itself seemed to resist control, hiding its pleasures behind shutters, yet never so well hidden that they couldn't find them. A donkey brays, startling one of the officers now leaving a den. He adjusts his sash nervously, as though reassembling his respectability before stepping back into the public gaze. You catch his eye for a moment, and he quickly looks away, embarrassed, maybe even annoyed. You don't laugh out loud, but inside, you can't help thinking, Cairo has seen this dance for centuries. The city shrugs off authority in its own way. Official reports and sermons may thunder, but in the lantern-lit alleys, life continues. People argue, sing, doze, smoke, and slip behind doors. The presence of uniforms only adds another layer of irony, a reminder that even the watchers are sometimes the most eager participants. You keep walking, the image of officers in smoky haze lingering in your mind. The contradiction doesn't weaken Cairo, it defines it. A city of rules and rule-breaking, of sermons and songs, of crackdowns and bribes, and tonight, under the watchful eyes of both lanterns and fezzies, you sense that Cairo itself finds the whole performance faintly amusing. The door closes behind the two officers, leaving you again in the soft rattle of the night. But now, drifting through the narrow lane, you hear something different, faint at first, like the tug of a memory. A rhythm, low and hypnotic, carried on strings, and the subtle thump of a drum. You follow it as though pulled on a thread, until you reach another doorway where the sound spills out like warm water. Inside, the smoke is the same, heavy, sweet, clinging to your clothes the instant you step in. But here, sound dominates. A man sits cross-legged with an oud resting against his knee, his fingers moving as if they were born for nothing else. The melody is slow, each note bent and stretched until it feels less like music and more like a sigh. Beside him, a frame drum thumps with a heartbeat rhythm, grounding the room while the strings pull it skyward. The combination is enough to make your own chest vibrate. The men lounging here are quieter, more entranced. Some tap their fingers on cushions in time with the drum, others sway gently with half-closed eyes. The music seems to stretch time. A song that might last 5 minutes, in daylight feels like an hour here, its loops and improvisations weaving seamlessly into the smoke. Historians still argue whether this connection between music and hashish was deliberate ritual or just convenient pairing. Some claim that musicians intentionally sought out dens, because the atmosphere gave their improvisations a more dreamlike quality. Others argue that listeners, softened by smoke, simply heard more than was actually there. Either way, the bond between hashish and music in 19th century Cairo became legendary, feeding into Orientalist fantasies painted by visiting Europeans, who scribbled about hazy concerts in dens of vice. The quirky detail is how unpredictable the performances could be. A musician might stop halfway through a song, burst into laughter, and announce that he had forgotten the melody, only to start an entirely different tune. The audience rarely complained. They nodded along, convinced the shift was intentional, or at least meaningful. Cairo had invented avant-garde music centuries before anyone thought to call it that. You notice a man humming quietly in a corner, his voice echoing the oud's melody. He isn't a performer, just a patron lost in the haze. But slowly, others join in. Soft murmurs layering until the whole room hums, the sound blending with the oud and drum into something communal. It's less a performance now than a shared act of being, everyone contributing their fragment of sound to the cloud of smoke. The oud player smiles faintly, closing his eyes, his fingers moving faster now. The room sways with him, laughter and sighs rising and falling like waves. You realize that music here is not entertainment, it is the second language of the smoke. The resin softens edges, and the music fills the space left behind. A European traveler once compared it to floating down the Nile on sound alone, though he admitted he couldn't recall a single melody afterward. That's the nature of this music. It isn't meant to be remembered, only lived in the moment. Like the smoke, it curls, lingers, and dissolves. The lamp sputters, casting the oud player's shadow huge against the wall, stretching his movements into something mythic. For a moment, it feels like you're watching not just a man, but the very embodiment of Cairo's rhythm. Half improvisation, half inevitability, swaying somewhere between heaven and dust. The song fades not with a final note, but with a laugh. The drum gives one last heartbeat thump, and the oud is laid gently aside. Silence fills the room, thick but not empty. A man nearby whispers, "That was the sound of paradise," and another replies, "Or at least the road toward it." Everyone chuckles softly, the smoke carrying the laughter like incense. You lean back, your body vibrating with the memory of strings and drum. The music lingers in you, as if your bones have absorbed it. Outside, Cairo still clatters and hums, but inside this room, the world has briefly been reduced to rhythm, smoke, and the faint smile of men who know how to stretch a single note into forever. You leave the music still reverberating in your chest, but before the night swallows it completely, you catch sight of something that startles you. Not men this time, but women. They are veiled, moving carefully through the alley, accompanied by a younger boy who seems to act as their lookout. They slip into a doorway with practiced ease, as though this is not their first time, nor a forbidden act, but a ritual of their own. Inside, you realize quickly that women are not entirely absent from these havens. Their presence is quieter, more discreet, yet undeniable. A corner of the room is veiled off with draped fabrics, and behind it you hear voices. Soft laughter, the clink of cups, and the unmistakable murmur of women talking among themselves. Every so often, one peeks past the curtain to signal for tea or coal, her bracelets catching the lamplight before she vanishes again. Historians still argue whether women truly participated as patrons in these hashish dens, or if their appearances were exaggerated by scandalized travelers looking to sell stories back home. Some scholars insist women only visited as musicians, dancers, or fortune-tellers, entertaining the patrons rather than partaking themselves. Yet scattered accounts, and the whispers that still echo through Cairo's oldest quarters, suggest that some women did indeed smoke, or at least shared the sweets, weaving themselves into the atmosphere on their own terms. The quirky tale you hear tonight comes from an old storyteller. He swears that a famous female singer once performed veiled in a den, her voice so powerful that men forgot to pass the pipe, sitting entranced until the coals went cold. Whether true or not, the image of smoke curling around her unseen face, her voice threading through the haze, feels unforgettable. As you settle back onto your cushion, you notice another figure, a fortune-teller with henna-stained hands, her bracelets jingling softly as she gestures over a cup. A group of men lean in, giggling nervously as she mutters predictions. One bursts into laughter when she tells him he will one day be wealthy, but only if he learns how to stop snoring. Even prophecy becomes comedy in the haze. The air grows thicker, and you hear more laughter from behind the curtain. One of the veiled women claps her hands in rhythm with a drum, her voice lilting in short songs between verses of gossip. The men nearby glance occasionally toward the curtain, curiosity plain, but nobody intrudes. It's as though an unspoken agreement governs the space. This corner belongs to them, and the rest of the den adjusts accordingly. You imagine the stories that must have traveled through these rooms. Women, musicians earning coin, women fortune-tellers, weaving mystery, women perhaps taking the same deep inhales as the men, vanishing into the haze. If the official histories rarely mention them, perhaps it's because nobody wanted to admit how much influence they carried in the shadows. The lamps flicker lower, their light catching silver threads in a veil. For a brief moment, you glimpse a woman's eyes as she leans forward to adjust the coal on her own pipe. They are calm, confident, and utterly unsurprised by your gaze, as though to say, "Of course we are here. Where else would we be?" The room hums with overlapping rhythms, oud strings still faintly plucked. Fortune-tellers' laughter, veiled voices, men sighing into cushions. It feels less like separate worlds colliding than like threads woven into one cloth. Cairo's dens were never only for one kind of person. They were mosaics, imperfectly balanced but undeniably shared, and as you lean back, letting the smoke curl around you again, you realize that the hidden presence of women in these lounges wasn't just rumor or decoration. It was another reminder that Cairo resists being boxed neatly into anyone's categories, whether by scandalized Europeans, pompous officers, or modern scholars still arguing. The truth is slipperier, softer, veiled like those women behind their curtain, present, powerful, and unwilling to be erased. The smoke still clings to you as you step back into the street, but this time the night greets you with a sharper scent, something fried, spiced, and entirely irresistible. You follow it. The way you followed the music earlier, your stomach now louder than your curiosity. Soon you stumble upon a food stall tucked beneath a sagging awning, its lantern glowing like a beacon. Here, the air is thick with cumin and sizzling oil. A man crouches over a wide pan, dropping in balls of mashed fava beans that hiss and crisp, into falafel. Beside him, skewers of lamb turn lazily over glowing embers, their fat dripping and spitting into the coals. Every few minutes he fans the fire with a woven palm frond, sending sparks spiraling upward like fireflies. The vendor grins as you approach, as if he's been expecting you all night. Without asking, he presses a warm piece of flatbread into your hand, stuffing it with falafel, pickles, and a drizzle of tahini. The bread is slightly singed at the edges, and the first bite nearly makes you forget the haze of smoke you've just left behind. Nearly. Historians still argue whether the food stalls clustered around hashish dens were a deliberate business partnership or just coincidence. Some insist the two thrived together. Smoke dulled the body, food revived it, and the cycle ensured both. Vendors prospered. Others argue the overlap was accidental, more about Cairo's narrow streets where every trade brushed against the next. Whatever the truth, you can't deny the genius of fried beans paired with heady resin. The quirky tidbit tonight is about a rumored secret recipe, falafel made with hashish paste mixed into the dough. Some travelers swore they tried it, describing nights of laughter and mornings of confusion. Yet no recipe survives, and most food historians dismiss it as a tall tale, noting that frying hashish would likely destroy its effect. Still, the story lingers, whispered like an inside joke whenever falafel and smoke appear in the same sentence. As you chew, you notice other late-night wanderers gathering, musicians taking a break, a fortune-teller from earlier, even a sleepy officer with his jacket half unbuttoned. The vendor knows them all, teasing one about his bad singing, another about owing him 2 copper coins. Food, it seems, is the equalizer. Smokers, singers, skeptics, all brought together by the need to fill their bellies before staggering home. The city itself joins in the feast. Cats dart between legs, pawing at dropped crumbs, their eyes flashing. Green in the lantern light. A boy carries a tray of tea glasses stacked precariously, steam curling up from each one, and when he passes, the air fills with the perfume of mint. The rhythm of the food stall is its own kind of performance. Bread is slapped onto the hot surface, beans are mashed, skewers turned, coins clink, jokes passed like salt. Each act flows into the next until the whole place hums with the easy contentment of people who know they've found the best spot in Cairo at this hour. You finish your bread and warmth spreads through you, not the dreamlike drift of smoke, but the grounding satisfaction of food. It roots you back in your body, reminding you that even in the haze of the city's hidden lounges, hunger always waits just outside. The vendor wipes his hands on his apron, nodding toward the street, as if to say the night is far from over. He's right. Cairo doesn't sleep, not fully, and neither, it seems, do you. The smoke may lure you inward, but the food brings you back out, ensuring you don't disappear entirely into the haze. As you step away from the stall, licking the last sesame seeds from your fingers, the street stretches before you. Lanterns, flickering, footsteps echoing, the city alive in all its hungry, smoky, restless glory. You know you'll wander further, because Cairo always has another corner, another den, another story waiting in the night. The food settles warmly in your stomach, but instead of sending you home, it makes you restless. Cairo refuses to let you. Leave early. Your feet, still sticky with dust and sesame crumbs, wander toward a street lined with shadows that don't behave like normal shadows. These aren't cast by lanterns or moonlight, but by fire. You find yourself at the edge of a small square where a man in a turban stands with a torch. He twirls it absent-mindedly, as though it weighs nothing, and then, without warning, presses the flame to his tongue. Gasps ripple through the crowd, followed by cheers when he grins with all his teeth intact. He bows, and another performer steps forward, balancing a sword across his head, while drummers pick up a pounding beat. The square is alive with performance. This is Cairo's late-night carnival, the entertainment bleeding into the streets when smoke lounges overflow. Jugglers toss clay cups into the air, catching them with a swagger that makes you laugh nervously because you know the cups aren't empty. Storytellers stand on boxes, waving their arms as they recite ancient tales of desert journeys, exaggerated so much that even the cats in the alleys seem to roll their eyes. Historians still argue whether these nightly performances were directly tied to the hashish scene, or whether they were just Cairo being Cairo. Some accounts insist that jugglers, musicians, and storytellers flocked to smoke dens, knowing the patrons, softened by resin and mint tea, would throw coins more freely. Others argue the performances were independent, part of the city's larger rhythm of markets and religious festivals that never seem to end. Either way, the overlap is undeniable. Smoke and spectacle hand in hand. One quirky tidbit that refuses to die is the tale of a fire-eater who once inhaled so deeply near a smoke den that he coughed out a perfect smoke ring, lit at the edges like a glowing halo. People swore it was divine, others said it was a trick, but either way, that performer supposedly never had to buy his own supper again. As you edge closer, the performers blur into the crowd. A drummer stops to sip tea, still tapping his drum with one hand. A juggler throws oranges to children who squeal and miss every catch, scattering fruit down the street. A veiled singer from earlier now stands openly, her voice winding above the drums, commanding attention not with spectacle but with sound. The torches flicker higher, and the air itself seems to pulse. You're not sure if it's the lingering smoke in your lungs or just the crowd's energy, but the scene feels unreal. A dream staged against crumbling stone walls. The line between performer and audience dissolves. Suddenly, everyone is clapping, stomping, whistling. Even you find your hands moving, caught in the rhythm of a night that refuses to rest. Coins clink into bowls, applause echoes, and slowly the crowd begins to thin. The sword balancer wraps his blade in cloth, the fire-eater douses his torch, the singer disappears into the alley with her companions. Yet the energy lingers, hanging over the square like the last ember of a coal. Cairo, you realize, is never silent. Even when the performers pack up, their rhythms continue in your head, overlapping with the memory of smoke, the taste of falafel, the echo of oud strings. You are part of the performance now, another figure drifting through the city's endless stage. As you leave the square, the stones still warm under your feet, you can't help but think of the phrase someone muttered earlier. Cairo is the city where even shadows perform. Tonight it feels entirely true. The crowd's cheers fade behind you, but Cairo refuses to grow quiet. Instead, the rhythm softens into something more intricate, a sound stitched from plucked strings and the faint beat of a hand drum. You follow it as you followed every whisper tonight, drawn like a moth. This time, the music isn't spilling into the street. It's tucked away, hidden behind wooden shutters that tremble with the vibrations. You push open a narrow door and slip inside. The room you enter is low and hazy, the air heavy with the familiar perfume of hashish smoke. But here, the haze is secondary. The real spell comes from the musicians seated cross-legged on rugs. One man cradles an oud, its polished wood catching what little light the lamps provide. Another taps gently at a darbuka, his palms moving like they're brushing secrets into the skin. A third scrapes at a rebab, its single string producing a voice so mournful it feels like it could split the walls. No one speaks. The listeners lie sprawled on cushions, their eyes half-lidded, their chests rising and falling to the tempo. Every so often, a slow curl of smoke escapes someone's lips, joining the suspended notes in the air until you can't tell where sound ends and haze begins. Historians still argue whether hashish lounges were truly incubators of Egypt's 19th century musical revival, or if they simply hosted it by coincidence. Some point to famous musicians who performed in such hidden rooms before later dazzling official audiences. Others claim these smoky corners were too marginal, too underground, and that serious music flourished elsewhere. Yet it's difficult to dismiss how perfectly these spaces suited improvisation. Late hours, softened minds, an audience too entranced to demand anything but more. A quirky tidbit, one traveller recorded a story of a musician who supposedly tuned his oud not by ear, but by watching the shape of smoke rings drifting upward. Each string, he insisted, had its perfect curve in the air. Was this true, or just another poetic exaggeration scribbled by a wide-eyed tourist? Hard to say, but tonight, staring at the wavering haze, you almost believe it. The melodies build slowly, one phrase repeated, stretched, bent, then passed from the oud to the rebarb. The rhythm swells, faster, faster, until it seems impossible that so few instruments can summon so much energy. Then, suddenly, silence. So sharp you think your heart has stopped, before a soft pluck restarts the cycle. The room exhales as one. Someone chuckles in the corner. Another coughs. The smoke thickens again, and the music resumes, as inevitable as breathing. You realize, this isn't performance in the way the fire eaters and jugglers played to the crowd. This is intimacy. The music is not for applause, but for survival, a way of carving beauty into a night that might otherwise vanish in a blur of smoke. As your eyes grow heavy, the notes seem to stitch themselves into your body. You feel the darbuka in your pulse, the oud in your breath, the rebarb in the ache behind your ribs. For a moment, it's as if Cairo itself is playing you, plucking you into its endless improvisation. When at last the music pauses, no one claps. A hush lingers, reverent, like the final inhale before sleep. Then a man with ink-stained fingers pours tea into small glasses, passing them around as casually as if the music had been nothing more than a conversation. Perhaps here it was. You sip, the mint cooling your throat, the sugar grounding you, and realize the night doesn't just entertain, it teaches you to listen differently, to smoke, to music, to silence itself, and so you sit, leaning back into the cushions, letting the final notes echo long after they've died away, knowing that Cairo's hidden smoke lounges aren't just about the haze, they're about the music that moves within it, wrapping you in a lullaby older than the walls themselves. The tea glass empties slowly in your hand, leaving only sticky traces of sugar at the bottom. Outside, the night has cooled enough that the air drifting in from a cracked window feels almost damp, a rare mercy in a city that usually prefers to roast you alive. You step back into the street, expecting stillness, but Cairo greets you instead, with laughter, shouts, and a new kind of music, the sharper clang of hammers on brass. You've stumbled into the quarter of artisans, where workshops double as late-night gathering halls. Lamps burn low, but the hammering continues long past reason, sparks jumping in the gloom like lazy fireflies. A man squats before a glowing furnace, shaping hookah bowls, while another carves long stems from wood, smoothing them with steady strokes. Around them, hashish smoke drifts just as freely as in the lounges, though here it mixes with the metallic tang of molten brass. The craftsmen welcome you with a nod. You perch on a bench, watching as their hands transform raw material into the very pipes that will fuel Cairo's endless nights. Some say the smoke lounges of the 19th century could not have existed without these workshop gatherings, where hashish and craft mingled as naturally as tea and sugar. Historians still argue whether artisans used smoke to focus or to numb the monotony, but either way, the haze curls steadily above their tools. One quirky tidbit you overhear from an old man polishing a hookah base. He swears a workshop once built a stem so tall it had to be passed up to a balcony to be smoked. Supposedly, it took 6 men to draw a single puff, which then swirled across the alley like a sandstorm. True or not, the story survives, shared as casually as a hammer's strike. The rhythm of labor is hypnotic. Tap, scrape, inhale. Tap, scrape, exhale. Even the youngest apprentices, their hands blackened with soot, fall into the pattern, their eyes glazed more from smoke than exhaustion. You realize this is music of another kind, not oud and rebarb, but the percussion of survival. Occasionally, laughter punctuates the rhythm. Someone cracks a joke about a crooked pipe, another pretends to cough dramatically after a too deep draw. A plate of olives circulates, followed by sticky sweets wrapped in paper. You accept both, because refusal feels impossible here, as though hospitality itself is hammered into the walls. And then, without warning, the work slows. Hammers rest, tools are set aside, and the men lean back against their benches. Someone begins to hum, a low tune almost swallowed by the haze. Another joins, then another, until a chorus of half-muttered song drifts through the room. It isn't polished, it isn't rehearsed, but it feels truer than performance, a harmony born of exhaustion, smoke, and camaraderie. You sit among them, half outsider, half absorbed. The pipes glint in lamplight, waiting for their turn in the city's lounges. Tomorrow they will scatter across Cairo, into hands rich and poor, into rooms hidden and open. Tonight, though, they remain here, glowing faintly, like secrets not yet spoken. Historians may never agree on whether these workshops were places of mere necessity or subtle revolution. Did the hashish they smoked loosen their creativity, or simply dull the endless ache of labor? The debate remains unsolved, but what you see tonight suggests something simpler. Smoke and craft were inseparable, woven into the rhythm of Cairo's survival. The night stretches on, punctuated by embers and laughter, until your eyelids droop. The craftsmen return to their benches, sparks flying once more, and you slip back into the street. The sounds of hammers linger in your ears, mingling with the music you heard earlier, another rhythm added to Cairo's unending score. And you think, in this city even labor sings. You drift further through the labyrinth of alleys, and Cairo shifts once again, like a stage changing its scenery without warning. The hammer beats fade, replaced by something slower, heavier, the groan of camels, the shuffle of donkeys, the grumble of merchants who refuse to sleep. You've wandered into the night market, where smoke doesn't simply float. It mingles with the perfume of roasted chickpeas, honey cakes, and simmering stews. Lanterns swing from ropes overhead, their glass panes stained with soot. Beneath them, vendors sit cross-legged beside baskets of dried fruits, nuts, and herbs. Some hawk their goods with sharp voices, but many simply lounge, pipes in hand, letting the smoke do their selling. The hashish haze is so thick here, it feels woven into the market's canopy, as if the stalls themselves exhale alongside thee. Mental, historians still argue whether these markets were tolerated as extensions of the official economy or ignored as troublesome sidelines. On one hand, they drew customers from all walks of life. On the other, their smoky atmosphere earned them the reputation of corruption. Yet, no matter where the truth lies, the market thrived, surviving crackdowns with the stubbornness of a weed. Quirky tidbit emerges as you pass a spice seller. He swears that the best way to tell if your hashish is genuine is to toss a crumb into hot milk. If it dissolves evenly, it's real. If it floats like wax, you've been swindled. He demonstrates with a wink, though whether his little performance is proof or pure salesmanship, you can't say. Still, the crowd chuckles, and someone buys. A pouch on the spot. You pause at a stall where skewers of meat sizzle over coals, their smoke tangling with the sweeter haze around you. A merchant tears off a strip and offers it without a word. The flavor is bold, heavy with spice, and you almost laugh. It tastes as though Cairo itself decided to season your tongue. The cook puffs from his pipe as he flips another skewer, unconcerned by the oil dripping dangerously close to the embers. The rhythm of the market is mesmerizing. Bartering voices rise, then drop into laughter. Children dart between stalls, carrying trays of tea. Somewhere, a lute strums lazily, less a song than a background hum, as if even music has grown tired but refuses to stop. And the hashish. It is everywhere. Men lean against crates of oranges, puffing leisurely. A woman with coal dark eyes passes by with a tray of sweets, and you notice the faint curl of smoke trailing from beneath her veil. Even the guards pacing the edge of the market seem slower, less interested in order, more focused on their own pipes, tucked discreetly at their sides. Some claim these night markets were Cairo's true heartbeat, where the rich and poor could mingle beneath the cover of darkness. Others dismiss that as romantic exaggeration, pointing out that wealth still bought the best seats, the best smoke, the choicest cuts of meat. Yet walking here, you sense at least a temporary truce, a place where class lines blur in the haze. You nibble at a sweet coated in sesame, sip tea so sugary it nearly aches, and realize you've been fully absorbed into the flow. Every sense is occupied, sight by lanterns, smell by spice and smoke, taste by endless offerings, touch by the jostle of bodies, hearing by a chorus of haggling voices. It's overwhelming, yes, but also oddly comforting, like being rocked by a cradle too large for comprehension. The market doesn't sleep. It only changes tempo. As midnight creeps closer, some stalls shutter, but others open, unveiling stronger brews, darker smokes, heavier food. Cairo seems to say, why stop when the night itself is endless, and you, drifting with the smoke, can only agree. You step away from the quiet scholar's courtyard, blinking as if leaving a library, and the city swallows you again. The air feels warmer here, thicker, humming with a pulse you can't quite place. Soon you catch it, the faint beat of a drum, steady and hypnotic, like a heartbeat stretched through leather. You follow the sound down a sloping lane until it pours you into a space that feels alive in every corner. A Sufi lodge. Not the scholarly hush of ink and parchment, but a place where body and spirit merge through music, movement, and, yes, smoke. The room is circular, its walls painted with geometric patterns that seem to shimmer under flickering lamplight. Men in loose robes gather in the center, forming a ring, their voices low at first, then climbing together in chants that spiral. Higher and higher. The air is dense with incense and hashish smoke, so heavy it almost feels like a second ceiling pressing down. Some scholars still argue whether hashish played a true role in Sufi rituals or whether later observers exaggerated the connection. But here, in this lodge, you watch how the smoke blurs the edges of the dancers, how it softens the line between body and spirit, and you realize why the debate never fully resolves. A quirky tidbit slips into your mind as one of the drummers grins wide, his teeth gleaming. Locals sometimes claimed that a skilled Sufi drummer could shake the smoke out of a man's head if he struck hard enough, a kind of sonic exorcism for anyone who'd overindulged, whether that's healing or just very loud percussion therapy. You can't say, but the thought makes you chuckle as the beat thunders louder. The dancers begin to whirl. Their robes flare outward, catching the light, while their heads tilt slightly to one side, as if listening to a secret only they can hear. The chants rise with them, voices layering into a sound that is both haunting and strangely soothing. Each turn seems to fold time inward, faster and slower all at once, until you lose track of the rhythm entirely. And always, there is the smoke. It clings to the whirling robes, trailing like phantom cloth. It billows around the drummers, curling, from their mouths in sync with the beat. You breathe it in and feel your chest echo with the rhythm, as though your body has been quietly drafted into the circle. The lodge is not grand, but it feels infinite. Small lamps line the walls, their flames trembling with each stomp of a dancer's foot. Carpets absorb the sound, yet the drumbeat vibrates straight through them, rattling your bones like dice in a cup. A man beside you leans forward suddenly, pressing his forehead to the ground, muttering prayers between breaths of smoke. Another sways with eyes half closed, lost somewhere far beyond this room. Historians puzzle over whether these gatherings were acts of rebellion, subtle defiance against the rigid moral codes imposed by rulers. The lodges weren't just spiritual. Homes, they were safe harbors for ideas, for visions, for questions forbidden elsewhere. Perhaps the hashish simply blurred fear, allowing courage to slip through. Or perhaps it was never about courage, only about dissolving boundaries until even the self became negotiable. As the chants reach their peak, the entire room seems to tilt. The smoke thickens, the lamps blur, and for a heartbeat you feel as though you're not standing in Cairo at all, but somewhere unmoored, suspended between earth and sky. It lasts a moment, or maybe a lifetime, before the drumming slows, the whirling slows, the chants taper to silence. The men collapse gently onto the carpets, robes still quivering from the motion. Someone coughs, laughs, then lights another pipe, the ritual folding seamlessly back into the haze of everyday indulgence. You realize there is no clear line here between sacred and ordinary, just gradations of the same breath. And as you step back into the street, your own breath feels slower, heavier, as though you too have whirled in their circle. The streets outside the lodge feel oddly subdued, as if the city itself has been caught in the aftershocks of chanting and whirling. But soon the lull breaks. Voices rise, laughter swells, and you drift into a quarter that thrives on words rather than music. Cairo's literary cafes. Here the air buzzes differently. Instead of the rhythmic beat of drums, you hear the shuffle of ink-stained fingers, the scrape of chairs, the shuffle of domino tiles between cups of bitter kawa. Writers and poets lean across tables so crowded with pipes and papers that you wonder how anything avoids setting alight. The smoke hangs heavier than anywhere else, not because of excess, but because no one bothers to wave it away. It has become part of the conversation, like an extra guest at the table. Historians still argue whether these cafes birthed truly radical literature or simply hosted idle musings over endless cups of coffee. Some manuscripts suggest the first drafts of reformist manifestos took shape here. Others paint them as little more than dens for daydreamers. The truth, as always, is probably tangled in the smoke. A quirky tidbit surfaces. One traveler once claimed that Cairo's poets were so wedded to their hashish pipes that they tapped the bowls like punctuation, the rhythm of smoking guiding the rhythm of their verses. You glance around and see how easily the habit could become a writing style. One man leans back, exhaling a phrase before scratching it onto the page. Another stalls mid-sentence, waiting until his pipe is relit to finish. The thought, grammar, it seems, surrenders to smoke. You edge toward a table where young men argue over whether Arabic poetry should modernize or cling to its classical meters. Their debate teeters between seriousness and parody. One insists that the old forms are divine, immutable. Another waves his pipe like a sword, declaring that verse must march with time. A third interrupts to recite a limerick so ridiculous that even the sternest man breaks into laughter. Smoke curls over their words, binding them in a haze where no line is sharp. Not far away, a cluster of playwrights rehearses dialogue aloud, their voices overlapping, sounding like half-drunk philosophers trying to outwit each other. A woman, with bright eyes, listens silently, jotting notes in the margin of a borrowed book. She hardly smokes, but every so often she leans close to another's pipe, inhaling just enough to blur her focus, then returns to her furious scribbling. You suspect she'll outwrite them all. The cafe itself creaks with history. Wooden beams, stained dark with centuries of smoke, walls patched with mismatched tiles, a ceiling fan wheezing above, pushing the haze around rather than clearing it. Waiters shuffle between tables carrying trays of tea, their shoulders brushing manuscripts as casually as plates. It feels fragile and alive all at once, as if a single spark could ignite either genius or disaster. Some say the great novels of Cairo began here, words first spoken in jest over shared smoke before becoming bound on pages that outlasted the men who wrote them. Others dismiss this as romantic myth, pointing out that most cafe scribblers vanished without leaving a line worth remembering. Yet the mystery itself is comforting, the idea that you might be watching history disguised as small talk. The conversation shifts around you. Politics, love, money, philosophy, all blurred at the edges. Someone jokes that the city itself is one giant poem written in hashish smoke on the night air. Another counters that Cairo is more like a short story, messy, fast-paced, and impossible to end cleanly. Both metaphors hang in the smoke, equal, parts nonsense and truth. You sit back, listening, the noise of domino tiles clacking like an alternate punctuation to the rising voices. The smoke thickens until even the lamps seem to flicker out of rhythm, and you realize that in this room, words don't need permanence. They exist as smoke does, ephemeral, drifting, reshaping, dissolving, and leaving behind only a faint trace of warmth. You wander on, leaving behind the poets and playwrights, and the streets lead you into a narrower quarter where the lamp seems dimmer and the doors sit lower, half hidden, almost as though they want to avoid attention. You notice a few men slipping quietly into one of these shadowy doorways, their shoulders hunched as if they're entering a confessional booth rather than a lounge. You follow them, curiosity outweighing caution. Inside, the air is heavy, Heavier even than the cafes you just left, this isn't the flamboyant smoke of poets or the rhythmic haze of Sufis. This is darker, denser, clinging to the walls like secrets. You've stepped into one of Cairo's illicit dens, the kind whispered about by police, preachers, and nervous neighbors alike. Here, the furniture is sparse, low stools, cracked mats, a few rickety tables. No one's here for ambience. The men huddle in corners, puffing with a grim determination that feels worlds away from the laughter and verse of the literary cafes. A rumor floats around that some of these dens operated under the tacit approval of crooked officials who pocketed bribes to look the other way. Historians still argue whether such corruption was widespread or just localized whispers magnified into legend. You glance at one man who stares blankly into the smoke, his eyes hollow but strangely calm. Beside him, another chews slowly on sesame bread, using it as ballast against the dizziness of too many pipes. A quirky tidbit, guides of the time occasionally warned Europeans not to mistake these dens for authentic cultural stops, since a tourist once tried to sketch inside one, and was promptly chased out with a broom. Not the most hospitable form of art criticism. The den is silent, save for the crackle of coals and the occasional cough. It strikes you as less a place of camaraderie and more a warehouse of escape. The smoke doesn't weave conversations here. It muffles them, seals mouths shut, buries thoughts in thick layers of fog, yet there is something magnetic about it. The stillness has its own rhythm, its own gravity. Men lean against walls, eyes half closed, swaying slightly like reeds in a current. No one looks at you directly, and you sense that in this room, individuality dissolves. Each person becomes just another shadow among shadows, indistinguishable in the fog. You remember the bright energy of the scholars' courtyard, the music of the Sufi lodge, the babble of the cafes. This, in contrast, feels like the underside of Cairo's lungs. An exhale too heavy to ever turn back into breath. You wonder if this is why the authorities feared such places more than the rowdy cafes. Not because people plotted rebellion here, but because they simply withdrew, drifting out of the reach of rulers, laws, and reason. The smoke grows thicker, and for a moment the room tilts. A man near you whispers something in a language you don't recognize, then falls silent again, his pipe slipping from his fingers onto the mat. Someone else lazily retrieves it, sets it upright, and resumes smoking, as if the cycle must remain unbroken. The atmosphere makes you want to laugh and shiver at the same time. It's absurd how a plant could bind men to silence with greater force than any decree or chain. And yet, in its way, the silence feels like defiance too. Not loud rebellion, but a quiet refusal to participate in the noise of the world outside. You step back into the street, blinking as though resurfacing from underwater. The night air tastes cleaner, sharper, almost too sharp. You cough, half from the smoke still clinging to your lungs, and half from the sudden awareness that, in these hidden dens, entire lifetimes can disappear into haze. The night draws you onward, and before long you're caught in the current of Cairo's more flamboyant corners. The quarter where lights burn late, where laughter spills from behind velvet curtains, and where every whisper feels half an invitation, half a trap. This is the world of cabarets, music halls, and backroom parties, and hashish flows here with the same casualness as wine. You slip through an arched doorway hung with colored lanterns. Inside, the room pulses with a different kind of energy than you've felt elsewhere. Drums throb in the corner, a fiddle joins in, and the sway of dancers sets the rhythm. Sequins flash, bracelets jingle, and the smoke drifts upward like a stage curtain being drawn for an unseen play. At a corner table, performers and patrons mingle without much distinction. A singer, with a voice like honey, leans across to light a merchant's pipe, and in return he slips her a handful of coins. Nearby, a dancer balances a tray of glasses on her head while twirling, her audience clapping in time, their own pipes forgotten for the moment. A quirky tidbit. Travel writers from Europe were both scandalized and fascinated, often scribbling notes about exotic temptations, as if describing a stage show rather than real people trying to earn their supper. Historians still argue whether hashish actually fueled the performances or if the patrons merely believed it did. Some accounts insist musicians played with sharper improvisation under its influence, weaving notes that bent and looped in ways sober ears couldn't match. Others dismiss this as romantic nonsense, arguing that talent alone created the magic, with hashish simply acting as background smoke. You notice how differently people here handle their intoxication compared to the silent dens. Here, smoke amplifies voices rather than muffling them. Jokes grow louder, arguments funnier, flirtations bolder. One man leaps onto a table, improvising a poem about his sandals while his friends roar with laughter. Another insists on explaining astronomy by blowing smoke rings and calling them planets in orbit. You can't decide if it's genius or lunacy, but everyone applauds anyway. The cabaret itself looks half finished, half falling apart. Plaster peels from the walls, and the rugs are patched with mismatched colors. But somehow the imperfections make the atmosphere richer, more real. It's not a polished theater, it's a breathing organism, stitched together each night by music, smoke, and the unspoken agreement that, just for a while, reality outside these walls doesn't matter. A singer launches into a mournful ballad, and the mood shifts. Patrons quiet down, pipes rest on the tables, and even the dancers pause. The melody hangs in the smoky air like a memory, soft and aching. For a moment, the laughter and chaos recede, replaced by something older, deeper, a teo's shared vulnerability. You feel it like a tremor, the way art has of sneaking into the cracks of intoxication and reminding everyone of their humanness. Then, just as quickly, the tempo snaps back to joy. Drums accelerate, dancers whirl again, and the patrons return to their haze, letting the sadness dissolve into smoke. It's almost comedic how swiftly emotion flips here, like the room itself refuses to let melancholy linger too long. By the time you step outside, the street feels louder than before. Musicians linger at the doorway, still strumming, while patrons stagger into the night, their laughter echoing down alleys. The city hums, restless, as if powered by the energy leaking from every cabaret and music hall. And in the lingering taste of smoke on your tongue, you realize you've just seen hashish, at its most theatrical, less a tool of retreat than a prop in the grand play of Cairo nightlife. You wander back into the broader arteries of the city, where the pulse of Cairo feels steadier, more measured. It is in these thoroughfares that the debate over hashish truly plays out, not in whispers of smoke-filled corners, but in speeches, pamphlets, and the clipped sentences of courtrooms. The very streets seem to carry echoes of arguments, half shouted, half murmured, about whether this plant should be embraced as harmless pastime or condemned as social poison. On one corner, you find a gathering of young men, dressed in their best European coats, their pipes tucked carefully away. They argue with dramatic hand gestures about reform, claiming hashish is holding Egypt back, painting it as a chain disguised as leisure. Just across the way, however, a group of artisans sit with their tools laid aside, puffing contentedly, insisting the pipe harms no one, and that talk of prohibition is merely imported nonsense from British officials with too much free time. Historians still argue whether the government's sporadic bans were genuine attempts at social improvement or simply political theatre designed to show colonial overseers that Egypt was modernizing. The laws shifted so often, sometimes harsh, sometimes lenient, that people joked hashish was more slippery than a Nile catfish. A quirky tidbit. Smugglers supposedly once hid pressed bricks of hashish inside hollowed-out loaves of bread, HITG, tactic so effective that one bakery gained a suspicious reputation for always selling slightly heavy loaves. In the cafes, newspapers fan the flames of debate. One article condemns hashish as the root of idleness, while another slyly notes that some of the very men voting on prohibition measures were seen puffing in private lounges. The hypocrisy wasn't lost on the people, who treated the whole affair with a mix of amusement and irritation. As you stroll, you can almost hear the tension between reform and tradition vibrating in the city's air. Families worried about their sons, poets defended their inspiration, doctors argued about health effects, and colonial officials hovered like hawks, eager to align Cairo with their own sense of order. Everyone seemed to have a stake in the smoke, even those who never touched a pipe. You pass by a small courthouse, its lamps burning late. Inside, a man stands accused of selling hashish, while his lawyer passionately insists it is no more harmful than coffee. The judge leans back, weary, as if he has heard the same speeches countless times. Outside, a small crowd waits, murmuring. Some clutch prayer beads and frown. Others light up, defiantly puffing just a few steps from the courthouse door. It's half protest, half comedy routine. What you realize in that moment is that Cairo isn't just a city of smoke, it's a city of arguments about smoke. The very act of inhaling has become political, tangled in questions of modernity, morality, colonial power, and cultural pride. Whether in scholarly journals, street sermons, or courtroom testimonies, the debate spirals endlessly, thick as the very haze that inspired it. By the time you drift away from the courthouse, the night air feels charged. You understand that these debates are not merely about a plant. They're about who gets to decide how Egyptians live, what pleasures are permitted, and what visions of progress will shape the city. And beneath all that, there is the persistent curl of smoke, winding through every conversation, impossible to banish entirely. The farther you walk, the more Cairo's heartbeat shifts again. Away from the polished courts and noisy cafes, you drift into quieter neighborhoods where back alleys branch like veins, carrying the city's more secretive flows. Here, hashish is less of a spectacle and more of an undercurrent, woven into smuggling networks that stretch from village farms to the very doorsteps of these hidden dens. You pause at a small warehouse near the river. Its shutters look ordinary, its walls unremarkable, but step closer and you notice faint, sweet scents clinging to the cracks. This is no simple storehouse. It is a way station where shipments are unpacked and repacked before vanishing into Cairo's labyrinth. Boats along the Nile carry bundles disguised as baskets of herbs, donkeys trot with sacks stitched to look like grain, and caravan drivers mutter prayers over crates that weigh suspiciously more than dates or figs. A quirky tidbit drifts from the gossip of dock workers. Smugglers once buried hashish in coffins, claiming it was the only way to guarantee customs officers wouldn't dare pry too deeply. Whether true or a macabre urban legend, the story makes you glance uneasily at every funeral procession that passes. Historians still argue whether Cairo's authorities turned a blind eye out of sheer incapacity or deliberate complicity. On one hand, the city was sprawling, impossible to police every alley or inspect every crate. On the other, there were whispered tales of bribes changing hands, of inspectors whose eyes suddenly grew less sharp after a well-placed coin or gift. One British official even complained in a private letter that he suspected the very police seizing contraband were reselling it by night. Inside one dim courtyard, you glimpse the logistics firsthand. Men squat over large flat pans, pressing dark, resin into neat blocks, wrapping them in cloth and tying them with reeds. Another marks each with a tiny stamp, a sign of origin, like a brand logo, reassuring buyers that the product is genuine. It feels almost like an assembly line, except no official record will ever note the labor. The atmosphere is tense but not frantic. Smugglers joke lightly, sip tea, and hum tunes as they work, their nonchalance betraying how routine the operation has become. To them, it's less crime than craft. One even holds up a fresh block proudly, as though he were showing off a loaf of bread from the oven. You almost want to applaud. Of course, the risk is real. Raids did happen, and when they did, punishment could be harsh, fines, prison, even exile. Yet somehow, the trade never stopped, because demand never waned. You sense that the entire city has made an unspoken pact. As long as the smoke keeps drifting, someone will keep finding ways to feed it. Walking away, you realize these networks are not just about hashish. They're about resilience, ingenuity, and the constant cat and mouse between indulgence and authority. Cairo thrives on these contradictions, and in the smoke curling from every hidden parcel, you see both the fragility of law and the strength of desire. You drift deeper into the city, following the scent of bread and spices until it mingles once more with that familiar sweetness of hashish. But this time, you notice something else in the air. Tones of laughter, instruments being tuned, a drumbeat rolling steady as a heartbeat. It is here, in the hidden corners of Cairo, that music and smoke are inseparable companions, each feeding the other in a looping rhythm that keeps the night alive. Inside a modest coffee house with peeling walls and crooked lamps, you find a circle of men gathered around a tabla and an AUD. Their voices rise and fall in song, improvising verses that drift as lazily as the smoke itself. The hashish isn't just background, it is the very muse, loosening tongues and hands until melodies emerge that might never have been dared in daylight. You lean back, half dizzy, half enchanted, and wonder how many songs were born in such hazy corners, only to ripple through Cairo's culture. Historians still argue whether hashish actually enhanced creativity or simply made people think they were brilliant. Yet you can't deny that some of Egypt's folk songs, catchy, enduring, endlessly replayed at weddings and festivals, first found voice in these dimly lit lounges. One quirky tidbit you overhear from a storyteller. A famous singer once claimed that hashish allowed him to hold a single note longer than any rival, though skeptics suggested he merely exaggerated for dramatic effect. Either way, the legend stuck, and his endless breath became part of Cairo's musical folklore. The rhythms roll on, joined now by clapping hands, by feet tapping under tables, sticky with spilled coffee. You notice that even those not singing are swaying gently, lulled by a trance that feels communal, as though the smoke itself were conducting the room. Someone shouts a request, the oud shifts into a familiar tune, and suddenly the space erupts into a chorus so unified that you almost forget where one voice ends and another begins. It isn't just music, though. Storytelling thrives here too. A man with a booming voice begins weaving a tale of ancient pharaohs, demons, and treasures hidden beneath Cairo's streets. His words are punctuated by dramatic pauses in which he inhales deeply from the pipe, then exhales into the laughter of the crowd. For a moment, time folds. Ancient legends drift into modern smoke, and listeners lean forward, wide-eyed, though they've likely heard this story a dozen times before. Walking back into the street, your ears still buzz with rhythm, your clothes carry traces of smoke, and you realize that hashish didn't only shape private reveries, it shaped collective art. From whispered verses to booming songs, from improvised tales to melodies carved into memory, the smoke left its fingerprints on the very culture that still hums through Cairo's veins. And so the city doesn't only dream in silence, it dreams aloud, in song, in rhythm, in laughter that echoes long after the pipes are extinguished. The haze of song fades as you push onward, and soon you find yourself in a very different kind of gathering. Here, the atmosphere isn't filled with rhythm or laughter. It is thick with incense, quiet chants, and the steady murmur of voices speaking in tones that seem halfway between prayer and philosophy. This is where hashish slips beyond simple indulgence and becomes, at least for some, a bridge to something more cosmic. Inside a candlelit chamber, tucked beneath a crumbling mosque wall, men sit cross-legged in a circle. Their robes are simple, their eyes half closed, their breaths measured. Between them rests a brass bowl of burning coals, the pipe passed hand to hand as though it were a sacred relic. Every inhalation is followed by a silence so deep you can hear the faint hiss of ash collapsing, as if each man waits for the smoke to carry his thoughts upward. Hashish, in these moments, is not about fun or rebellion. It is framed as a key, unlocking visions, loosening the grip of the physical world, letting the mind wander into what Sufi mystics sometimes described as the in-between. Historians still argue whether these practices were truly spiritual or merely rationalizations for indulgence, but sitting here, surrounded by murmured invocations, you sense that at least some of these men believe wholeheartedly in its power. 1. Quirky tidbit you overhear from a young initiate. He insists that his uncle once fasted for 40 days while taking hashish, claiming the plant allowed him to see colors in the Quran's verses that weren't visible to the ordinary eye. Whether metaphor or exaggeration, the story lingers in the smoky air, adding to the mystique. A scholar seated near you begins to recite lines of poetry, his voice rising with the rhythm of his breath. The smoke curls around his words until they feel less like recitation and more like invocation. He speaks of gardens that never wither, of rivers flowing with honey, of stars whose light is close enough to touch. The others nod, their eyelids heavy, as though they are glimpsing those visions, right here in this cramped room. Yet there is a fragile edge to the practice. You catch whispers of doubt, warnings that too much indulgence leads not to enlightenment but to delusion. Even within mystical circles, debates raged. Some saw the smoke as a false shortcut, a counterfeit form of transcendence that distracted from the harder path of discipline and prayer. Others defended it as a tool, no different from music or fasting, provided it was handled with reverence. As you leave the chamber, your clothes cling to the scent of both incense and smoke. The city outside feels suddenly sharper, louder, brighter, as though stepping out of a dream. You realize that in Cairo, hashish could serve wildly different roles. For some, a distraction, for others, a devotion, for still others, a dangerous temptation. The same plant, the same smoke, but always a different meaning. And you can't help but smile at the thought, whether by prayer or by pipe, Cairo has always been a city searching for visions, even if they rise from the ember of a coal. You wander deeper into the quarter, where the smoke grows thicker, the laughter louder, and the shadows longer. Tonight, the mood is different. Not mystical, not lyrical, but rebellious. Hashish, you realize, isn't just about relaxation or creativity. It's also about defiance. When rules tighten, when taxes rise, when religious authorities thunder against indulgence, Cairo finds its quiet ways to push back. Inside a courtyard, hidden behind a cracked wooden gate, you stumble upon a gathering that feels halfway between a party and a protest. Men and women sit close together, passing pipes with exaggerated cheer, laughing too loudly, as if daring anyone to silence them. It isn't just about enjoyment, it's about showing they can. One man toasts the group with his coffee cup, shouting that no ruler, no imam, no foreign official will ever tell him how to breathe. The others cheer, though someone quickly shushes him, glancing nervously at the door. Historians still argue whether hashish circles really functioned as proto-political spaces or whether that's just romantic hindsight, but you can feel the spark of resistance in the air. Whenever an authority bans something, it gains a new sheen of excitement, like the thrill of sneaking into a locked room. Here, smoking becomes an act of quiet rebellion, a middle finger made of smoke rings. A quirky tidbit drifts through the laughter. One man jokes that during the last crackdown, he trained his parrot to squawk, "No hashish here," whenever inspectors approached. The bird apparently fooled the officials more than once. You picture the scene: serious men in uniforms standing stiff in the doorway, while a bright green parrot scolds them from a perch, and you can't help but laugh. But rebellion has its risks. You notice the way heads turn at every knock on the door, the way the pipes are hidden under shawls at the faintest sound of boots in the alley. There's tension under the merriment, a recognition that any night might end with a raid. Yet that danger is precisely what fuels the energy. The louder the bands, the more defiantly the smoke rises. As the night deepens, someone begins to chant. Slogans, half joking, half serious, about freedom, about dignity, about Cairo belonging to its people, rather than to the bureaucrats or the foreign consuls. The words float into the smoky air, and though the group soon dissolves back into laughter, you know they carry an undercurrent. These aren't just jokes. They're small sparks of resistance carried on the same smoke that softens voices and loosens tongues. You step back into the cool night, realizing that in 19th century Cairo, hashish wasn't always an escape from the world. Sometimes it was. A way of facing it, smoke doubling as both shield and weapon, laughter masking the pulse of rebellion. The city dreams, yes, but sometimes those dreams carry teeth. By now, the smoke of countless pipes has clung to your skin, your hair, your very thoughts. Yet before the trail of this story winds toward its end, you wander into one final type of haven, one that doesn't sparkle with music, or thrum with politics, or echo with mystic prayer. Instead, this place is quieter, slower, humbler. It is the lounge of ordinary men and women who want nothing more than to stretch out the day a little longer, to find ease in their bones after hours of toil. You slip into a shaded corner shop whose door hangs half open. Inside, a small circle of stonemasons, bakers, porters, and seamstresses gather around a battered pipe that looks like it's been patched a dozen times with cloth and copper wire. They are not here for visions or resistance or poetry. They are here because their backs ache, Their hands blister, their lives weigh heavy, and smoke offers a little pause. One man exhales, sighing that the hashish takes the edge off the bread prices. A woman, her palms raw from kneading, says it makes her sleep through the night without waking. The others nod in weary agreement. Historians still argue whether hashish, among the lower classes, was a poor man's medicine or just a numbing distraction. You can see both sides. Tonight, it feels medicinal, in the way laughter can heal or rest can restore. There is no pretense here, just survival. A quirky tidbit breaks the melancholy. A mason tells the story of his cousin who once tried to smoke through a clay pipe he had carved himself, only to have the pipe crumble mid-puff and scatter glowing coals across his robes. The memory still makes the circle erupt into chuckles, a brief reprieve from the heaviness of their lives. The lounge is lit by a single oil lamp, its glow flickering against the cracked walls. There is no music, no grand decor, only the rhythm of smoke and silence. Yet in that simplicity you sense a kind of truth. Hashish here is not a symbol of decadence or rebellion, but simply a way of softening the edges of a hard world. When you step out into the Cairo night once more, the street feels hushed, as though even the city has settled into its own tired sigh. You realize that the story of these hidden havens is not just about mystics or poets or rebels. It's also about these men and women whose dreams are modest, whose pleasures are small, but whose lives are no less part of the city's smoky tapestry. The ember glows, the smoke drifts, and somewhere in the stillness, Cairo breathes. The path of smoke has led you everywhere, through candlelit courtyards, shadowy tunnels, rooftop dreams, and circles of laughter and rebellion. Now, as the journey comes to its quiet end, you wander into a final lounge, one that feels like a fading echo of all the others. It is smaller than the rest, tucked behind a spice merchant's stall. A single curtain sways gently, letting you slip inside. The room is nearly empty, save for a few men and women stretched out on low cushions. Their pipes burn faintly. Their conversations are little more than whispers. No songs, no arguments, no declarations, just the murmur of smoke. It feels as though this lounge remembers every tale that came before. The mystic chants, the painter's brushstrokes, the rebel's cheer, the laborer's sigh. Here, all of it lingers in the haze, woven together like threads of incense. One man coughs softly, adjusting his shawl. Another stares at the ceiling as if watching invisible stars. A woman smiles faintly, humming a tune you can barely hear. It's not about visions anymore, or resistance, or escape. It's about rest, letting the smoke cradle you until the city itself seems to close its eyes. Historians still argue whether these humble rooms disappeared because of stricter laws or simply because new fashions replaced them. Either way, what you witness now feels like a memory already in the act of fading. A final quirky tidbit surfaces from the haze. Someone jokes that if the authorities ever sealed the city's smokehouses, Cairo would lose so much fog that even the Nile would look thinner. The laughter that follows is tired but genuine, a last spark before the coals die down. You step back into the cool night air, realizing that these havens, grand and humble alike, are not just footnotes in dusty books. They are living testaments to how people found peace, pleasure, and defiance in the folds of everyday life. The smoke drifts upward one last time, and then it is gone, leaving only the memory of warmth and quiet company. The path of smoke has led you everywhere, through candlelit courtyards, shadowy tunnels, rooftop dreams, and circles of laughter and rebellion. Now, as the journey comes to its quiet end, you wander into a final lounge, one that feels like a fading echo of all the others. It is smaller than the rest, tucked behind a spice merchant's stall. A single curtain sways gently, letting you slip inside. The room is nearly empty, save for a few men and women stretched out on low cushions. Their pipes burn faintly. Their conversations are little more than whispers. No songs, no arguments, no declarations, just the murmur of smoke. It feels as though this lounge remembers every tale that came before, the mystic chants, the painter's brushstrokes, the rebel's cheer, the laborer's sigh. Here, all of it lingers in the haze, woven together like threads of incense. One man coughs softly, adjusting his shawl. Another stares at the ceiling as if watching invisible stars. A woman smiles faintly, humming a tune you can barely hear. It's not about visions anymore, or resistance, or escape. It's about rest, letting the smoke cradle you until the city itself seems to close its eyes. Historians still argue whether these humble rooms disappeared because of stricter laws or simply because new fashions replaced them. Either way, what you witness now feels like a memory already in the act of fading. A final quirky tidbit surfaces from the haze. Someone jokes that if the authorities ever sealed the city's smokehouses, Cairo would lose so much fog that even the Nile would look thinner. The laughter that follows is tired but genuine, a last spark before the coals die down. You step back into the cool night air, realizing that these havens, grand and humble alike, are not just footnotes in dusty books. They are living testaments to how people found peace, pleasure, and defiance in the folds of everyday life. The smoke drifts upward one last time, and then it is gone, leaving only the memory of warmth and quiet company.